Hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Lambda Kappa Sigma Professional Fraternity for Women in Pharmacy On Demand Webinar. My name is Letitia Warunek, and I will be presenting this webinar on meaningful meetings. I chose the topic of meaningful meetings because regardless of where we are in our careers, we are all asked to participate in meetings, and I believe it's important for us to ensure that we can have effective meetings that will help us to reach our goals. I graduated from the Wilkes University Nesbitt School of Pharmacy in 2017 and went on to complete a PGY1 residency at the Huntington VA Medical Center in West Virginia, and then a PGY2 residency in internal medicine at Buffalo General Medical Center in New York. Currently, I am an assistant professor of pharmacy practice at Wilkes University with a practice site at Geisinger Community Medical Center in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where I help medical residents from the Wright Center manage patients admitted to the general medicine service. I also serve as the faculty advisor for the LKS Alpha Phi Collegiate Chapter at Wilkes. In order for us to have a meaningful meeting, we have to first evaluate the purpose of the meeting. Formal meetings are an important way to discuss recent updates, deliver important announcements, solicit feedback from participants, and share relevant information. These meetings can also provide an opportunity for members to come together in order to be able to review the goals and mission of the group, and most importantly, to be able to make decisions together as a group. Our main goal is to have a successful and productive meeting. However, we know that sometimes doesn't always happen. One cause of an unproductive meeting is a meeting with an unclear purpose. This can occur when there is no defined goal for the meeting, or when meeting participants come unprepared to discuss the issues that need to be addressed. We can also have issues due to lack of engagement of the attendees, or we can have an unproductive meeting if the necessary people are not present. Many of these issues can be prevented if there's appropriate planning for the meeting, making sure that we prepare a high-quality agenda, and also send out the meeting information with enough time for attendees to prepare. It's also important to limit other distractions where possible. This can be done by setting ground rules for the meeting, making sure that everyone silences their devices, and also prevent side conversations by attendees. There are many factors to consider when planning a meeting, and I grouped some of these key factors together under broad components. These components are pre-meeting planning, creation of the agenda, and execution of the meeting. I also added in a component of other activities that can be considered based on the type of meeting and participants present. During the pre-meeting planning phase, we need to start by identifying some basic information about the meeting. First, we need to evaluate if a meeting is necessary to discuss the material, and if so, what are the main goals of the meeting and what topics need to be discussed. We also have to decide how long the meeting should be. Something else you can consider is making a set schedule for the meeting and allotting time to discuss each topic. This can be extremely helpful if you know that a topic will have a lot of discussion that could potentially extend your meeting time. We also need to identify who should attend the meeting. It's important to plan meetings at a time and location that is as convenient as possible for participants to attend. Now, we know that's not always feasible to have everybody present with everyone's busy schedules, but hopefully we can have the most participation if the meeting date and time are sent out early enough so attendees can prepare. Lastly, we need to identify an appropriate meeting place. It's important to consider room size and seating preferences. We also have to make sure that the location has the necessary electronic devices we might need for the meeting, such as presentation devices or a phone for attendees that might be calling into the meeting. As discussed on the previous slide, it's extremely important to notify participants about the meeting ahead of time so that they can plan to attend. It's important to share the date, time, and location of the meeting. Sharing this information can be done in many different ways, and it's important that you identify the best method to inform your group about upcoming meetings. The most common method of sharing meeting information is via email, and also including a calendar invite. But this may not be appropriate for all groups, so it's important to evaluate what method works best for each situation. Along with sharing basic meeting information, we must make sure that participants are aware of the meeting's purpose so that they can prepare for the meeting ahead of time. We want to make sure that we provide specific instructions about what participants should do ahead of time, such as review the meeting agenda or other important documents, and also what they should bring to the meeting, such as report summaries or other updates on projects that they're working on. In order to appropriately inform attendees about these topics, we must prepare necessary meeting materials ahead of time. The most important document is the agenda, which serves as a guide for the meeting and informs participants about what information will be covered. And we'll talk more about this with the next slides. But we also need to consider any other documents that might be important during the meeting, such as reports or other presentations. We want to make sure that all of these materials are prepared ahead of time so that everything is accurate and that we can ensure that everything gets dispersed appropriately to attendees. As mentioned before, it can be extremely beneficial for these materials to be sent out prior to the meeting so that participants can review them ahead of time and come prepared to discuss the material. The meeting agenda acts as a roadmap for the meeting and ensures that all topics get addressed. It also ensures that the meeting stays on track. I included a sample layout of a meeting agenda, and in most settings, your group or organization will already have a set template that they use for meetings. Now, there is some basic information that should be included on the agenda to ensure appropriate documentation of the meeting, such as the location, the attendees present, and the date. In addition to serving as the roadmap for the meeting, the agenda is also used to document things that are discussed during the meeting. This is referred to as the meeting minutes, and we'll talk more about meeting minutes in upcoming slides. Typically, the first item on the agenda will be a call to order, which signifies that the meeting is starting, and this is something typically done by the leader of the meeting. It's important to document the actual time that the meeting starts after the call to order is made. At this point, the leader of the meeting will then welcome everyone to the meeting and conduct any introductions if necessary. Typically, the next item on the agenda is approval of last meeting's minutes, where everyone is required to review the meeting minutes from the previous meeting and either approve them or make corrections if necessary. After the call to order and approval of minutes from the previous meeting, the next items are specific topics to be discussed, and these are listed in number format with a title or description. It can be beneficial to include who is responsible for leading the discussion of that topic if it's someone other than the meeting leader. Like we discussed before, it can be helpful to have a suggested time limit for discussing each item or items that you think might have a longer discussion. Items that are included on the agenda can be items that need additional discussion from previous meetings, or they can be new items for discussion. Regardless, as the leader, it's important to seek out potential items prior to the meeting so that you can allot time for each item and assure appropriate discussion of each. After you prepare the agenda and send out meeting invitations, you are ready to execute your meeting. In order to ensure a successful meeting, the leader should start by clarifying expectations of the attendees. This could include reviewing the goals of the meeting, describing what type of participation is expected from attendees, and reviewing the agenda. Hopefully, everyone's already reviewed the agenda ahead of time so that they're now ready to participate in discussion. We also want to make sure to distribute any additional documents that may be referenced during the meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, it's important to identify someone who will record the meeting minutes. Typically, the meeting secretary or another attendee is responsible for recording the information that's discussed during the meeting. I included a link on the slide that describes tips for recording meeting minutes. Everyone will have a chance to review the minutes from the meeting, so even if you're not the person that's doing the recording, it's still important to pay attention and remain engaged during the meeting. Depending on the type of meeting, you may have specific procedures that you follow. The most commonly used procedures for formal meetings are Robert's Rules of Order, which is a guide for conducting meetings and making decisions as a group. There are a lot of components to Robert's rules, and for the purpose of this presentation, I included a few of the common terms that are often used in meetings. All formal groups and organizations have bylaws, which are used to describe the purpose of the group, the organizational structure, and operating procedures. The next term is quorum, which is the minimum number of members needed at the meeting in order to vote on issues. This is decided and confirmed by the leader of the meeting and can be important in determining if voting on decisions can occur. The third term is a motion, which is a formal proposal made to the group to consider a topic for discussion or to vote on during a meeting. An example is, I make a motion to open discussion on this topic. Once a motion is made, a second motion is required in order to proceed with the discussion or vote. Lastly, we have to consider voting procedures, which include things like deciding who will vote and how voting will occur. These procedures will all be determined and described in the organization's bylaws. Now, keep in mind that Robert's Rules of Order is a very formal way of conducting meetings, and it's okay if you're not currently implementing these in your meetings. But it is important to be familiar with some of these terms, as you will likely encounter them in meetings in your future. Throughout the meeting, it's important to engage the audience. It's important to hear from all members of the group and ensure that everyone has an opportunity to share their thoughts on the topics being discussed. In order to hear from all members of the group, it might be beneficial to ask questions to instigate a discussion. It can also be helpful to call on attendees where appropriate. Say, if you know that they can provide unique insight into the topic, or maybe they have experience with the topic. As the meeting leader, it's important to ensure that everyone has the full attention of the group when they speak and that everyone gets heard. We also have to keep in mind that other questions might arise during the discussion. Maybe we need to obtain more clarity on a topic, or maybe we might need to seek out additional information. If this happens, it's best to document the questions and provide the group with an answer soon after the meeting. During discussion, there might be issues that arise that cause tension between group members. As leader of the meeting, it's important to be able to identify these issues and address them appropriately. One issue is when members have conflicting views on a topic. This can potentially lead to arguments. To address this, it's important to build on previous agreements that were made on common ground in order to move forward. Now, we may not always be able to come to a unified decision or resolve the conflict, and it might be appropriate to address certain conflicts outside of the meeting, where we can have more time to evaluate the concerns of the group members. The next issue that can derail a successful meeting is a long discussion. You might have a topic that's really complex, or a topic that members have really strong opinions about. This is where setting a time limit for each item can be beneficial to prevent the meeting from getting off track. And as a group leader, you may need to be the one that makes the decision to stop the discussion in order to address the other items on the agenda. We also have to watch for participants who might inadvertently dominate the conversation. This can happen if members are really passionate about a topic, or maybe they just have more knowledge and experience about a topic. During this situation, it's important to ensure all participants have a chance to speak and also be able to direct questions to participants who may be less likely to speak up. Another issue that sometimes occurs is when group members are unable to come to a consensus about a decision. Depending on timing and when you need a decision to be made, it can be appropriate to table or hold off on making a decision until the next meeting, especially if more information is needed on a topic. There are other times when a decision needs to be made at that time, and depending on the conversation, it might be appropriate to bring the item up for a formal vote. When the meeting comes to an end, it's important to review what topics were discussed and what was accomplished. It's also important to assign follow-up responsibilities based on what was discussed, and also pair those responsibilities with deadlines for the next meeting. It can be really helpful to assign these responsibilities for follow-up throughout the meeting so that everyone has a clear understanding of their role for future meetings. It's also important to distribute the minutes after the meeting so that everyone has a chance to review them and act on any items that require follow-up. Many of you might be utilizing conference calls and webinar-based meetings within your LKS chapters or other organizations. There are many different platforms available for webinars, and depending on your workplace or university, you might have additional resources available. Regardless, it's important to talk with your group and figure out which platform works best for your members. One benefit of using these platforms is that you potentially have some more availability when picking time to have the meeting, as attendees can call in from whatever location, and this can be a useful tool to have meetings later in the evening. It's still really important to make sure that the agenda and other information is sent out in a timely manner, and you should still obtain an accurate list of all attendees who participate in the meeting. If this is a conference call, you might have everyone say their name, or be sure to get a list of everyone signed in if it's a webinar. One difficulty with these meetings is that it's extremely difficult to have a good discussion if everyone's talking at once and speaking over each other. When you're not talking, it's really important to mute your phone or computer so that you can limit background noise. It's also good to limit background distractions if possible so that you can stay engaged in the meeting and also prevent disruptions in discussion. For a conference call where you can't see the attendees, it can also be beneficial to say your name before speaking so that the group knows who's speaking. This can be especially important if you're new to the group. Using a phone or computer can sometimes make it hard for everyone to hear who's speaking at each time, so it's also important to speak loudly and clearly, and also pause if you hear someone else starting to speak. As with all meetings, it's important to engage all members of the group. Now, this might require asking open-ended questions to the group or asking individual questions to each member. For the last part of the presentation, I wanted to briefly highlight some icebreaker and team-building activities that can be incorporated into your meetings. These can be extremely beneficial to your group and can help members to get to know each other and also strengthen the teamwork and relationships within your group. When you're trying to decide which type of activity to incorporate, it's important to assess who is present at your meeting. If everyone there is new to the group, you can consider an icebreaker, which will help everyone to get to know each other and reduce any anxiety. If everyone's already familiar with the group, you can consider adding in a team-building exercise to strengthen the relationships or help your members develop a new skill. When planning these activities, it's important to consider the time that you have, as some activities take longer than others, and some require less planning than others. I listed a few examples of some icebreakers I thought could be beneficial within our LKS chapters. The theme of all these games is get to know you. The first one is 2 truths and a lie. One person gives 3 statements about themselves, 2 are true, 1 is false, and the rest of the group has to guess which one is the lie. Our chapter implemented this activity with the potential new members in the fall, and it really stimulated some good discussions. The next activity is this or that. Everyone takes turns asking a question. An example could be, which do you prefer, jeans or leggings? There are many examples out there for questions, so as the leader, you can have questions prepared ahead of time, or you can have the group members come up with their own questions. The next activity, find 10 things in common, requires everyone to break up into smaller groups of 4 or 5 people, and then these groups must find 10 things in common. Now you can put some restrictions on this, like making sure none of these commonalities have anything to do with work or school, and then at the end, everyone will share the results. The next activity is icebreaker bingo. So everyone will get a bingo card with facts that were prepared ahead of time by the leader, and you have to walk around the room and find people that have facts that are similar to the ones on your sheet, and then the first person to reach bingo wins. The last activity is speed dating. Now this requires moving chairs around so that you have them set in pairs, and you also need to have a buzzer or a bell. You'll break everyone into 2 groups. You can have them count off as 1s and 2s. One group will stay in their seats, and the other group will rotate every few minutes, and they'll have a set amount of time for introductions or a quick conversation. You may consider suggesting topics for them to discuss, such as name, where are you from, why did you join LKS, and other things that can instigate conversation. Now, these are just a few examples of some of the icebreakers that are out there, and I would encourage you to try these and others and see which ones work best within your group. I also included some team building activities. I really enjoy these activities because they can highlight some of the similarities and differences that we have with members of our group. And it can help us to understand each other better and learn about each other's strengths and weaknesses. The first one here is the 5-minute personality test, which requires you to go through 10 questions that list personality traits. And you go through each row and rank each personality trait on a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being the least like you and 4 being the most like you. Then you add up the total for each column, and the 2 types with the highest scores reveal that the most accurate picture of your natural inclinations, strengths and weaknesses, and how you'll naturally respond in most situations. They have each category described by an animal: a lion, otter, golden retriever, and beaver. And I included here an example of the description for the otter. And I think it's really important for us to reflect on our personalities and how they can impact the group that we're working in. And it's also important for us to understand the other personalities that we have to work with in our group. This can help us in times of conflict and to ensure that we have the best possible teamwork working on a project. Another team building activity is the human knot. This requires more movement and engagement by the group and also requires a large space. Participants will stand in a circle and take right hands with one person and left hands with another person, making sure that this is not a person standing directly next to them. Then they have to work as a group to untangle the knot without breaking the chain. This provides an opportunity for the group to practice teamwork and cooperation. Another team building activity is the marshmallow challenge. Materials for this activity include 20 sticks of spaghetti noodles, 3 feet of tape, 3 feet of string, 1 marshmallow, and a measuring tape. The goal of this activity is to build the tallest freestanding structure in 18 minutes. The marshmallow must be at the top of the tower, and you cannot hold up or touch the tower once the time is up. This activity incorporates teamwork, critical thinking skills, and a little bit of imagination. Anytime you are incorporating a team building activity into your meeting, it's important to offer some time for reflection and discussion at the end. You can ask some follow-up questions to engage the group and stimulate reflection. You can ask things like, who was the leader on your team? If you had a leader, how did he or she do? What could you have done to keep all members of the group fully engaged? These reflections and questions should be led by the group leader or the person who is organizing the activity. And you should attempt to tie in the goals of this activity with the mission of your group. For some final tips, remember to identify the purpose and goals for your meetings and make sure all members understand these goals. Be sure to set aside ample time before the meeting to prepare an agenda and any other materials needed. Remember to engage your attendees, utilizing questions and promoting discussion from all members. Assign responsibility for follow-up items and determine deadlines. And consider incorporating icebreaker activities to help members get to know each other, and incorporate team building activities to promote teamwork and communication. This webinar is part of the Library of Programs from Lambda Kappa Sigma. A special thank you to the LKS Communications Committee and headquarters staff for their assistance with this program. LKS sisters are welcome to reach out to me via email with any questions or feedback. Thank you for viewing this webinar, and I hope that you were able to take away something meaningful from this Meaningful Meetings webinar. Thank you.